Deep beneath the mountains, a young dwarf named Elara just broke a sacred rule. Her people have long forbidden entry into the sealed archives of Moria, but she believes the legendary Seven-Layered Rune, hidden within, can restore her clan's fading glory. By the end of her journey, you will understand the true cost of unlocking an ancient power and what it means to be worthy of its secrets. Her first step into the darkness triggers a silent alarm, awakening guardians that have slept for centuries and pitting her against the very traditions she was raised to uphold. Where are you listening from right now, and what time is it there? Do you believe some knowledge is worth any risk? A single, shimmering line on the plinth answered Elara's touch. This was the foundation rune, a symbol so basic every dwarven child learned it, yet here it felt profoundly different. She traced its simple form, and the stone beneath her boots groaned to life. The entire chamber floor pivoted, grinding as a massive section slid away to reveal a dark, gaping staircase leading down into absolute blackness. Before she could even process the discovery, a thunderous crack echoed as the archway shed entered through was sealed shut by a slab of solid rock. She was trapped. A low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the very air, a sound that felt less like a noise and more like a presence. Panic clawed at her throat, her breath catching in the suddenly thinner air. To turn back was impossible. The only path left was the one she had unknowingly chosen. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the steady, ominous hum. She forced her breathing to slow, clutching the simple pickaxe at her belt. This was no longer about restoring glory, it was about survival. The rune had not offered a prize, it had issued a test. With a resolve that felt both foolish and brave, Elara took a deep breath and stepped onto the first cold step downward, completely unaware that her simple act of reading had just sent a wake-up call through the mountain's stone heart. The darkness swallowed Elara's torchlight for only a moment before a faint, answering glimmer caught her eye. A thin vein of pale blue crystal pulsed softly within the wall. With careful hands, she worked a piece loose with her pickaxe, its cool, steady light blooming in her palm to form a gentle lantern. The new illumination washed over the walls, revealing what the pure blackness had hidden, breathtaking murals carved with stunning precision. They depicted ancient dwarven smiths, not just forging the seven-layered rune, but arguing, debating, and infusing it with what looked like their very life force. This was not a simple creation, it was a monumental act of collective will. The light also fell across the floor just steps ahead, exposing a subtle discoloration in the stone, a pressure plate she would have certainly triggered. Her relief was short-lived, chased away by the mural's story. Each layer of the rune was shown protected by a unique trial, a challenge demanding both sharp intellect and physical endurance. The rune was not a mere object to be claimed, it was a gauntlet to be survived. Panic urged her to rush, to flee the growing dread, but Elara's disciplined mind won out. She forced herself to stillness, her eyes tracing the carved patterns, searching for any clue, any hint of what lay ahead. Her clan's elders had dismissed her as reckless, but now, faced with fatal stakes, her true nature emerged, patient and deeply respectful of the history, screaming silently from the stone. She committed the mural symbols to memory, a map of challenges yet to come, and as the last image settled in her mind, a new sound joined the oppressive silence, a rhythmic, metallic scraping that echoed from the chamber ahead, slow, deliberate, and hunting. The rhythmic scraping sharpened into the heavy crunch of stone, grinding against stone, as Elara slipped into the circular chamber. Towering in its center was a giant figure carved from the mountain itself, a sentinel covered in glowing runes. Its single, massive gemstone eye swiveled, locking onto her with an ancient, unforgiving gaze. The air itself seemed to freeze. With a groan of shifting rock, one of its colossal fists swung toward her in a slow, inevitable arc. Elara Dove, her body moving before her mind, could fully process the terror, tumbling behind a thick stone pillar just as the fist slammed into the ground where she had stood. The impact sent a violent shudder through the floor. This was no longer a test of wits, it was a hunt. Each ponderous swing of the Guardian's arms connected with another pillar, and the chamber echoed with the sickening crack of splintering stone. Her cover was being systematically destroyed. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, panic clouding her thoughts. But then her eyes, trained on the murals upstairs, saw past the brute force. She focused on the patterns etched across the construct's broad chest, and there it was, a single, smaller rune, glowing with a softer, steadier light than the aggressive red of the others. The makers had carved a dormancy rune right into its heart. They had not built this guardian to be destroyed, but to be calmed. Reaching it, however, meant getting dangerously close. A pillar to her right exploded into rubble, dust filling the air and choking her. She had one chance. Timing the Sentinel's slow, methodical turn, Elara pushed off from the last intact pillar, her muscles screaming as she launched herself forward. Her fingers stretched out, brushing against the cold, rune-inscribed stone of its chest. For a terrifying moment, she hung in the air, completely exposed. Then, the world vanished in a flash of blinding, brilliant blue light. The brilliant blue light faded, leaving only the soft glow from Elara's crystal lantern. Where the stone sentinel had stood was now a pile of inert rubble, its runes dark and silent. Revealed behind it was a seamless stone door, twice her height, and covered in a new, intricate pattern of symbols. This was the second layer, the gate rune. As she approached, a faint whisper brushed against her mind, not a sound in the air, but a pressure in her thoughts. It felt like a cold draft, seeping into the corners of her consciousness. The psychic murmur formed a single, damning question. Why are you here? The rune was not asking for a password. It was probing her soul. An image bloomed unbidden in her mind's eye, vivid and painful. She saw her grandfather, his broad hands, calloused from a lifetime of carving runes, resting on his workbench. He was looking at her, not with anger, but with a deep, weary disappointment. She was a young girl again, being scolded for tampering with a minor hearth rune, her reckless curiosity threatening to unravel a simple household enchantment. His voice echoed in the memory, a sound she had tried to forget. You seek to touch power you do not understand, Elara. You chase a glimmer without seeing the fire that feeds it. The psychic whisper amplified his words, making them ring in the present. A hot wave of shame and defiance washed over her. Was this all her quest was? A childish rebellion, a desperate grab for glory to prove a long-dead man wrong. The internal conflict was a physical weight on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The whispers intensified, questioning her worth, her motives, her very right to be there. She could feel the stone door resisting her, its solidity a reflection of her own stubborn pride. And in that moment of absolute pressure, something in her broke. She did not shout a denial or a justification. Her shoulders slumped, and the words spilled out, raw and honest, to the empty, judging chamber. "I am afraid," she admitted, her voice barely more than a breath. "I am ambitious, and I was reckless. I wanted to prove I was more than just a disappointment. But I also want to understand. I want to learn what we have forgotten." The admission hung in the air. For a long, terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, resonant groan that seemed to come from the heart of the mountain itself, the massive stone door began to grind sideways into the wall. The psychic whispers ceased, their absence as startling as their arrival. The way was open. Beyond the threshold lay impenetrable darkness, a vast cavern that swallowed the light from her lantern. The air grew cool and damp, carrying the clean scent of stone and the rhythmic, lonely sound of water dripping from a great height. And from the depths of that enormous space came another sound, a faint, melodic chime, like distant bells made of glass, a haunting music played by shifting crystals in the deep earth. The cavern floor was not stone, but a mosaic of polished crystal that chimed softly under her boots. All around her, a forest of towering, translucent spires reached toward the darkness above, each one humming with its own internal, latent energy. The air itself seemed to vibrate with 1,000 silent songs. Elara took a single step forward, and the entire labyrinth reacted. A massive crystal pillar to her left slid sideways with a low, grating rumble, blocking the path she had intended to take. Another pivoted, opening a new, narrow corridor that glimmered with deceptive beauty. This was not a static maze. It was a living puzzle that moved to a music she could not yet hear. She remembered the murals from the upper chamber, the depictions of dwarven masters, not just carving runes, but singing to the stone. The notes were etched there, a sequence of 5 distinct tones. She took a steadying breath, her cut arm throbbing in time with her heartbeat, and tried to hum the first note. Her voice wavered, strained by fear and the thin air. The note came out flat. Instantly, the crystal directly in front of her began to shudder, its gentle hum escalating into an angry, piercing whine. With a sound like shattering glass, it exploded, sending a storm of razor-sharp shards flying toward her. Elara threw herself behind a wider crystal column, but not fast enough. A sliver of crystal sliced across her forearm, a sharp, stinging pain that drew a line of bright red blood. She clutched the wound, her breath catching. Panic would get her killed here. Precision was everything. The labyrinth was not hostile. She realized it was indifferent. It demanded perfect harmony, and her fear was creating dissonance. Looking at the glowing crystal shard in her palm, the very one she had pried from the wall to make her lantern, an idea sparked. It was a piece of the mountain itself, pure and resonant. She would not trust her own trembling voice. Tapping the shard gently against the largest crystal near her, she produced a clear, perfect chime that hung in the air like a physical thing. The crystal forest responded immediately. The blocking pillar retracted, and a new path aligned, the crystals shifting with a graceful, musical sigh. Focused now, her mind clear, she moved forward, using her crystal tool to tap out the sequence. Each correct note guided her deeper, the labyrinth rearranging itself into a welcoming passage rather than a deadly trap. The final chime rang out, truer and more beautiful than all the others. The last crystal slid fully aside, revealing the labyrinth's quiet heart. There, waiting for her, was a small, perfectly circular pool of black water, its surface so still it looked like polished obsidian, perfectly mirroring the glittering crystal ceiling far above. The surface of the obsidian pool did not show Elara her own tired face. Instead, the water shimmered and swirled, pulling her into a vision of breathtaking clarity. She saw her clan, her people, no longer struggling in their dim halls. Great forges roared with blue flame, crafting wonders of metal and light. Children laughed, their hands tracing glowing runes in the air with effortless skill. It was the restoration she had dreamed of, a future of prosperity built on the power she sought. But the vision did not end there. A shadow fell across the happy scene. The same runes that lit the forges now gleamed on weapons of terrible design. Dwarves eyed each other with suspicion, their former unity shattered by a gnawing greed for more power, more control. The very artifact meant to save them had become a seed of conflict, turning kinship into rivalry and pride into arrogance. The reflection was showing her not one future, but two paths inextricably linked. Salvation and ruin were two sides of the same coin, and she was the one about to flip it. Her chest tightened with a dread far deeper than any fear of physical traps. This was a moral chasm, and she was standing at its edge. Her ambition, which had felt so pure, now seemed dangerously naive. Did she have the right to make this choice for everyone? Was her clan's fading glory a price worth paying to avoid the corruption of its soul? The weight of it threatened to crush her. She looked from the vision of glorious light to the one of bitter shadow, and she understood this was the fourth layer's true test. It was a challenge not of mind or body, but of conscience. Closing her eyes, she made a vow, not to the empty chamber, but to the faces of her people shimmering in the water. "I will not seek power for its own sake," she whispered, her voice steady with a new resolve. "I will seek the wisdom to wield it. I accept the responsibility for what comes next." The moment she spoke the words, the vision dissolved. The beautiful, terrible images vanished, and the pool's mirrored surface rippled as if from a dropped stone. Then, with a soft, sucking sound, the black water swirled and drained away into unseen fissures, leaving the stone basin dry and empty. Where the pool had been, a dark, circular shaft was now revealed, dropping away into an abyss of pure darkness. From the opening, a new scent drifted up to meet her, the warm, distinct smell of hot metal and ozone, the familiar breath of a dwarven forge waiting deep below. The climb down the shaft was a descent into a familiar, forgotten heat. Elara's hands burned against the rough-hewn rock as she lowered herself into the cavern below, a space so vast its ceiling was lost in shadow. The air was thick with the scent of hot metal and ancient coal, the very breath of her ancestors' greatest labors. And there, in the center of it all, stood the heart of the forge itself, a colossal stone anvil upon which the third rune, creation, was deeply etched. As her boots touched the soot-stained floor, blue flames roared to life in the great hearths, flooding the chamber with a cold, spectral light. The heat was a physical force, pressing in on her from all sides, sucking the moisture from her lips and forcing her to squint. Before the anvil, A pedestal rose from the floor, holding a single, shimmering orb of molten metal. Above it, a complex network of stone channels and levers waited, their purpose clear. She had to guide the molten metal, to shape it into a key, before it cooled into a useless lump. It was a test of pure dwarven craft, but the forge itself was her impatient opponent. Without warning, a jet of superheated steam erupted from a vent to her left, hissing like an angry serpent and missing her by inches. The heat it radiated was unbearable. She had to move, and quickly. Tearing a strip from her already tattered cloak, she wrapped it around her hands, a feeble shield against the scorching mechanisms. Her mind raced, calculating the path. She pulled a lever, and a channel aligned, the molten orb sluggishly rolling forward a few inches. Another jet of steam blasted, this time from directly ahead, forcing her to duck and nearly losing her grip on the hot metal. This was not just about smithing, it was a deadly dance. Every movement had to be precise, every decision made in the split second between the hiss of building pressure and the searing release. Her arms ached, her makeshift gloves smoked, and the orb was beginning to lose its brilliant glow, cooling toward failure. With a final, desperate heave, she slammed the last lever into place. The molten metal rolled into a final, intricate mold. There was a loud hiss and a plume of steam as it cooled, solidifying in an instant. In her raw, trembling hand, she now held a key, its teeth perfectly formed, still warm with latent power. As if in acknowledgement, a section of the far wall groaned and slid sideways into a hidden recess. Beyond it, a narrow bridge of weathered stone stretched out over an abyss, so deep no light could reach its bottom, a silent passage into the mountain's even older secrets. The stone bridge groaned under her weight, a fragile thread of rock stretching into the abyss. With each cautious step, the whispers began, not in the air but in her mind, a chorus of ancient, defeated voices. "You are not the first," they murmured, their tone heavy with despair. "You will not be the last to fall." The bridge shuddered, its surface cracking beneath her boots, as if made of brittle glass. The whispers grew sharper, more personal, echoing her own secret fears. "You are an outcast, a reckless child, playing with forces that shattered greater dwarves than you." Her grandfather's disappointed face flashed before her eyes, and the bridge swayed violently, a stone slab breaking loose and tumbling into the infinite dark below without a sound. Her knuckles were white, her breath coming in ragged gasps. This was not a test of balance, but of belief. The very legacy she sought to reclaim was trying to cast her out. The accusations fed on her deepest insecurities, the loneliness of her quest, the gnawing fear that her ambition was merely arrogance in disguise. The bridge felt paper thin, ready to dissolve into dust and take her with it. Then a memory surfaced, clear and strong amidst the psychic storm, her grandfather's voice from a long-ago lesson, firm and steady. "A true rune smith does not command the stone," he had said. "He listens. He understands his place within its story." Elara lifted her head, her voice cutting through the spectral taunts, raw and defiant. "I am Elara, daughter of Borin, granddaughter of Thrain Stonehand." She shouted into the chasm, "My hands are his hands. My will is the mountain's will." The words were a shield. With each declaration, the bridge beneath her feet grew more solid, the stone knitting itself back together with a low, resonant hum. The whispers faltered, then faded into a stunned, perfect silence. The path ahead was firm, but her heart felt bruised. She had won, but she understood the rules had changed. The mountain was no longer testing her strength or her craft. It was testing her spirit. On the other side of the chasm, the air turned bitingly cold. The walls were sheathed in a thick, silent frost that crackled like breaking bones under her boots. The cold was a physical wall, stealing the warmth from her lungs with every breath. Before her stretched a library of impossible scale, its shelves and reading stands all carved from crystal clear, blue-veined ice. This was the Frostfall Archive, and resting upon its frozen lecterns were the books themselves, massive volumes with covers of solid ice and pages of pale, shimmering light. The fourth rune, memory, was not a symbol to be read, but a history to be absorbed. The urge to touch the nearest tome, to feel its knowledge flood into her, was overwhelming. She reached out, her fingers brushing the icy cover. Instantly, a searing cold, far worse than the ambient air, shot up her arm. The ice of the book itself crawled over her skin, coating her forearm in a thick, paralyzing rime. She jerked back with a gasp, her heart hammering, the limb already feeling numb and heavy. The knowledge here was protected not by locks, but by a fatal frost. Then she remembered the key, still warm in her hand from the forge below. She pressed its metal teeth against the frozen book. A soft hiss filled the silence, and the ice receded from her arm and the tome itself, the cover clearing to reveal swirling, glowing script. As she read, the words did not just stay on the page. They flowed into her mind, not as dry text, but as vivid, living memories. She saw the first forging of the Sky Sunderer axe, felt the smith's triumphant joy. Then, just as vividly, she witnessed the axe being used in the War of Broken Stones, felt the devastating grief of its creator as his creation brought ruin. Each book was a double-edged sword, holding both glorious achievement and its tragic cost. The conflict was immediate and visceral. Her thirst for answers screamed at her to rush, to consume every frozen history as fast as she could thaw them. But the lingering numbness in her arm was a constant, chilling reminder. One misstep, one moment of impatient haste, and she would become just another frozen statue in this archive, another forgotten memory. She had to choose what knowledge was worth the risk of permanent ice. Her eyes scanned the spines, reading titles etched in frost. She ignored the histories of grand conquest and immense wealth. Her focus narrowed, searching for one specific concept mentioned in the murals far above. She found it at the back of the library, a slender volume simply titled The Fifth Layer, Harmony. This was her priority. Using the key, she carefully thought it, her movements slow and deliberate. The knowledge that flooded into her was not a story of events, but a principle. It spoke of the rune not as a single power, but as a system of interlocking forces, a delicate equilibrium where creation could not exist without dormancy, and memory was meaningless without the potential for loss. To force control over it was to break it. True mastery lay in understanding its inherent balance. As the last of the harmonic principles settled in her mind, a deep cracking sound echoed through the cavern. The ice of the library itself began to weep, great droplets forming and sliding down the shelves. The frozen archive was melting, the released water pouring from the dissolving books and gathering on the floor. It did not form a pool, but instead flowed with purpose into deep, pre-cut grooves in the stone, tracing the lines of a massive, complex rune that glowed with a soft blue light. The completed symbol pointed like an arrow toward a dark, low archway, from which the sound of rushing water now echoed, a descending waterway calling her deeper into the mountain's heart. The water from the melting archive pulled her forward into a roaring subterranean river, its current swift and strangely warm, but it was not just water that flowed around her knees. Shimmering, translucent scenes flickered on its surface like reflections from a broken mirror. She saw legions of armored dwarves marching in perfect unison, heard the ringing of 1,000 hammers in a golden age forge, felt the triumphant roar of a kingdom at its peak. These were the temporal echoes of Moria's past, and the river itself was the fifth layer, the river of time. Its beauty was a trap, reaching out instinctively toward a vision of a breathtaking crystal city. Her fingers brushed the shimmering surface. The cavern vanished. Suddenly, she was there, standing on a sunlit bridge she had only ever seen in crumbled ruins, the air smelling of cedar and hot stone. The feeling was intoxicating, a pure, undiluted connection to the glory she sought to restore. But the moment the memory solidified around her, a profound weakness washed over her, as if the vision itself was feeding on her vitality. The world began to flicker, the sounds growing distant. She was not just observing history, she was becoming part of it, and the cost was her own presence in the now. With a gasp of sheer will, she wrenched her mind back, stumbling in the real river's current, her body feeling hollow and drained. The conflict was immediate and brutal. Every echo promised answers, a direct line to the knowledge she craved, but each one was a riptide threatening to pull her under forever, to leave her a ghost in a world that was already dust. She remembered the principle of harmony from the frozen archive. She could not fight the river's pull, nor could she surrender to it. Balance was the key. Focusing inward, she visualized the concept of the present, not as a single point, but as a steady, unwavering thread running through the chaotic flow. She did not block out the echoes, but instead let them flow around her, observing their beauty and their tragedy without reaching out to touch. She became an anchor in the current, her feet firmly planted on the riverbed, allowing the past to exist without letting it consume her. It was the hardest mental effort of her life, a constant battle against the hypnotic call of what was lost. The risk was no longer a broken bone or a frozen limb, but the utter erasure of her own existence, lost in a yesterday so bright it would blind her to her own today. After what felt like an eternity of focused resistance, the river's current slackened, its shimmering visions fading into mere mist. The water grew shallow, then spilled her out onto a quiet, sandy shore. The roar of the river faded to a distant murmur behind her. Here, the air was utterly still and heavy, with the scent of dry, ancient stone. Before her, set into the cavern wall with no fanfare or decoration, stood a single, massive door of dark, unmarked metal, its surface reflecting no light, offering no clue to what lay behind its silent, imposing face. The unmarked metal door offered no handle, no keyhole, no runes to decipher. It was a seamless, silent barrier that reflected nothing, not even the dim light from her crystal. Elara placed a hand on its cold surface and felt a deep, resonant hum, a vibration that seemed to be listening. She remembered the river's echoes, the proud declarations of kings, and the whispered oaths of smiths from the Frost Archive. The password had to be hidden within those histories. She took a steadying breath and spoke the first word that came to mind, a title of great honor from the age of crystal cities. Sovereign. The moment the word left her lips, the door's surface seemed to ripple like dark water. A strange, pulling sensation tugged at her throat, and her voice came out weaker, slightly hoarse, on the final syllable. The door remained shut, heavier and more imposing than before. A cold dread settled in her stomach. The door was not just judging her words, it was consuming the very sound of them, drinking her voice with each failed attempt. Silence was no longer just an absence of sound. It was becoming her enemy, a thief in the shadows stealing her strength. She tried another word, a term for unbreakable alliance she had seen in a frozen book. Unity. The pull at her throat was sharper this time, a tangible drain that left her voice raspy and thin. She coughed, her hand flying to her neck as if she could physically stop the loss. Panic began to set in. How many more guesses did she have before she was rendered completely mute, trapped forever before this impassive gate? Her mind raced, sifting through the river of memories and the archive's lessons. The king's boasts had led to ruin. The smith's oaths had been broken. Words of power had consistently failed. Then, the principle of harmony from the fifth layer resurfaced in her thoughts. True power was not in declaration, but in resonance. It was not about what was said, but how it was expressed. The password was not a word. It was a tone, a specific harmonic frequency that matched the door's own deep hum. She had to sing it, but her voice was already damaged, scraped raw by the door's hunger. Producing a clear, pure note felt impossible. She closed her eyes, pushing past the pain and the fear of permanent loss. This was the sacrifice the mountain demanded. She thought of the perfect chime of her crystal shard in the labyrinth, the balance she had found in the river of time, and she poured that memory into her broken voice. The sound that emerged was not beautiful. It was strained and rasping, a ragged note that tore at her throat, but it was true. It held the essence of harmony she had learned. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, the deep hum of the door shifted, synchronizing with her fragile tone. The massive slab of metal swung inward without a single sound, revealing a cavern that took her breath away. Before her stretched a garden of glowing fungi and stone flowers, their petals formed of delicate, luminous crystal. The air itself hummed with a strange, living energy, thick with the scent of rich earth and ozone, a silent, vibrant world waiting in the deep earth. The garden hummed with a life that felt alien and ancient. Beneath her boots, a vast network of glowing roots and fungi pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, a living map of the mountain's own vitality. This was the Harmony Rune made manifest, a delicate balance of growth and decay. But one section of the garden was dark, its luminous fungi withered and blackened by a creeping, oily blight. The air there smelled of rot. Her first instinct was to tear the sickness out, to purge it with force. But when she reached for a withered stalk, the blight reacted instantly, spreading like a stain across the healthy growth beside it. A jolt of panic shot through her. Direct action was not the answer, it was the poison. This was a test of finesse, not force. Her mind raced back through her trials, the principle of balance echoing from the frozen archive. She could not fight the decay, she had to encourage the life. In her pack, she still had the water skin filled from the river of time, The water, having carried the echoes of the past, felt charged with potential. She sprinkled a few careful drops onto the border between the healthy glow and the creeping blight. The water sizzled, not with heat, but with a soft, cleansing light, and the blight halted its advance. It was a start, but not enough. Then she remembered the Crystal Labyrinth, the perfect notes that had guided the stone. She took her crystal shard and tapped it gently against a large, healthy fungus. The clear, resonant chime rang out, and the network of roots around it brightened, their pulsing light growing stronger. She was not a warrior here, she was a gardener. She moved along the blight's edge, a patient, painstaking process, sprinkling minute amounts of the sacred water and using her crystal to play a simple, repeating melody of growth. It was agonizingly slow. Each time she thought of rushing, of using more water or a louder note, the blight would twitch and threaten to spread. The entire garden seemed to hold its breath, its fate balanced on her patience. She had to trust the process, to believe that gentle, sustained encouragement was more powerful than violent intervention. Finally, after what felt like hours, a tender, new shoot of glowing fungus broke through the blackened earth. Then another. The healthy growth was slowly, naturally, pushing the blight back, reclaiming its own territory. As the last of the oily darkness receded, the central, largest fungus in the garden shuddered. Its cap unfurled like a flower, blooming into a magnificent, intricate pattern that shone with a blinding white light. This light poured down, converging on the ground to trace a symbol that burned itself into the stone floor. With a deep, grinding sound, the inscribed section of the floor sank down, then slid away, revealing a new descent. From the opening, a deep, rhythmic beating echoed upward, a sound like the heart of the mountain itself, steady, powerful, and waiting. The descent ended in a perfect sphere of a room, its walls smooth and dark. Suspended at its very center was a heart of pure crystal, larger than Elara herself, and it pulsed with a slow, deep light. Each beat sent a corresponding vibration through the floor, a rhythm so fundamental it felt like the mountain's own lifeblood. This was the Heart Rune, the 6th layer, and its demand was absolute. To pass, she had to make her own frantic heartbeat fall into sync with that ancient, steady cadence. She closed her eyes, trying to force her body to obey, but the memory of near-fatal traps and draining trials kept her pulse racing. The chamber answered instantly. The smooth wall to her right shuddered, and a spear of sharp crystal shot out, missing her shoulder by inches. She scrambled back, her heart hammering even faster against her ribs, a wild drum against the mountain's calm metronome. More crystals began to protrude from the walls around her, a deadly forest growing from her own panic. She was the source of the danger. To survive, she had to conquer the fear screaming in her own veins. Dodging another crystalline spike, she forced herself to stop running and dropped to her knees, pressing her palms flat against the vibrating floor. She shut out the threatening walls and focused inward, searching for a rhythm she could trust. Then she found it, a memory surfacing through the fear, the steady, communal cadence of her clan's forging songs. She began to hum the old melody, low and deep, using its familiar tempo to pace her breathing. Inhale for 4 beats of the crystal heart, hold for 4, exhale for 4. It was a battle of attrition against her own body. Each time her focus wavered, a new crack of forming crystal would snap her attention back. But slowly, painstakingly, her frantic breaths began to lengthen. The hammering in her chest softened, its wild tempo gradually yielding to the disciplined rhythm of the song. Her heartbeat slowed, steadied, and then, for one perfect, silent moment, it beat as one with the mountain. The effect was immediate and profound. The threatening crystals retracted smoothly back into the walls. The violent shuddering ceased. A wave of warmth flooded the chamber, emanating from the crystal heart itself, which now glowed with a gentle, golden light. Elara felt a connection deeper than any she had known, as if her own vitality was now a thread woven directly into the vast, living tapestry of Moria. This was no longer about claiming power, but about becoming part of something immeasurably larger than herself. The crystal heart pulsed once, brightly, and a beam of pure white light shot from its core, projecting a complex, swirling symbol onto the domed ceiling above, the seventh and final rune layer. As she stared up at its impossible geometry, the solid floor beneath her vanished without a sound, and she fell into a void of endless, star-dusted night. Her fall ended not with an impact, but with a gentle settling onto a floor of soft, dark moss. Above her, the cavern ceiling was a perfect replica of a star-dusted night sky, each point of light a tiny, glowing crystal. The seventh rune, Destiny, was not carved in stone, but written in constellations that swirled and reformed with her every breath, a living map of possibilities. To proceed, she had to walk the sky, stepping only on the star patterns that felt true. Her first step was cautious, guided by logic, placing her boot squarely on a bright cluster that seemed to form a hammer. The moment her weight settled, the constellation shattered. A single star broke free from the ceiling, transforming into a searing meteorite that screamed toward the spot where she had just stood. She threw herself sideways, the heat of the passing missile scorching the air. The entire starry map above flickered and reset, the patterns now more intricate, more convoluted, a tangled web of light. Panic was a cold knot in her chest. This was a puzzle that punished pure reason. Each failed attempt only made the solution more complex, and the meteors fell faster, with greater accuracy. She was running out of safe ground. The mountain was not testing her knowledge now, but her very connection to its will. She remembered the profound harmony in the heart chamber, the feeling of her own pulse, syncing with the mountains. Logic had brought her this far, but it would not carry her across a sky of fate. Closing her eyes, she blocked out the dazzling, deceptive stars. She focused inward, on the quiet hum of the harmony principle she had nurtured in the garden, and the steady rhythm she had learned from the heart rune. She let her feet become an extension of that feeling, an instrument of intuition rather than thought. Her next step was not chosen, it was guided. She placed her foot on a dim, seemingly insignificant star. It held, a soft chime echoed in the cavern. Another step, this one to the left, onto a zigzag pattern that her mind would have dismissed. It held firm. She was walking a path only she could feel, a thread of destiny woven from her own hard-won wisdom. Each correct step made the remaining stars glow brighter, the true path revealing itself to her senses, not her eyes. The final step was a long stride onto a constellation that blazed with the shape of a single, open hand. As her boot touched it, the entire starry ceiling dissolved into a shower of harmless, glittering dust. The darkness above melted away, replaced by a warm, serene light. She stood now in a small, perfectly circular chamber. There were no traps, no guardians, only a simple stone dais. And floating serenely above it, rotating slowly in the still air, was the fully assembled, radiant form of the Seven-Layered Rune. The Seven-Layered Rune was not a static object, but a living, breathing system of light. Each layer orbited the others in a complex, celestial dance, their paths weaving through the air above the dais. Elara felt the pull of them immediately, a physical and mental gravity that threatened to tear her apart. To approach was to step into a storm of pure potential. The foundation rune tugged at her boots, demanding stability, while the memory rune whispered 1,000 conflicting histories into her mind. The heart rune's beat pounded in her chest, a rhythm she fought to match, and the river of time's current seemed to flow around her, threatening to sweep her into the past. Chaos and order warred in that small space, and she was the battleground. Her body trembled from the strain, every muscle screaming in protest against the conflicting energies. To force them together would be like trying to cage lightning. It would shatter her and likely bring the entire mountain down upon her head. The fate of her clan, the very balance of Moria, depended not on her strength, but on her understanding. She closed her eyes against the dazzling display, reaching not for the runes themselves, but for the lessons they had taught her. She remembered the Sentinel, and how its power was not broken, but calm. She recalled the harmony of the garden, where force only spread the blight. She felt the steady pulse of the mountain's heart, and let it guide her own frantic rhythm. Her hands rose not to grab or command, but to conduct. She did not pull the runes toward her. Instead, she invited them. She hummed the clear note from the Crystal Labyrinth, a tone of pure resonance. She visualized the principle of balance from the frozen archive, where creation and dormancy were two sides of the same coin. She poured the patience of the gardener and the acceptance of the river traveler into her open palms. It was an act of supreme will, a silent plea for unity. The runes resisted, their orbits becoming more erratic, their light flaring angrily. A wave of psychic pressure slammed into her, and she felt a trickle of blood from her nose. This was the breaking point. She could either retreat into the safety of her own limitations, or surrender completely to the process. With a final, shuddering breath, she let go of her last shred of ambition, her last desire to control. She became a vessel, a conduit for the harmony she had learned, and in that moment of absolute surrender, the chaos stilled, the orbiting runes slowed, their paths aligning. One by one, they drifted toward the center, layering themselves not in conflict, but in concert. The gate clicked into the foundation, the heart's rhythm synchronized with the river of time. Memory and harmony intertwined, with a final, soft chime that seemed to ring from the very beginning of the world. The 7 layers fused into a single, radiant symbol of impossible beauty. The storm of energy vanished, replaced by a profound, deafening silence. The unified rune, now a perfect, glowing whole, pulsed with a gentle, comforting light and slowly descended, coming to rest just above her waiting, outstretched hand. The light was warm, familiar, and overwhelmingly vast. Her fingertips brushed the unified rune, and the world dissolved into pure light. It was not a fire to consume her, but a river of living memory flowing directly into her soul. She saw the first dwarven smiths, discovering the song within the stone, felt their triumphs and their profound failures, and understood the true cost of every rune ever carved. The mountain's ancient consciousness, vast and patient, turned its attention to her, not as an intruder, but as a newly recognized part of itself. The sheer scale of it was terrifying, a tidal wave of eons threatening to shatter her mortal mind. Her body convulsed, her nerves screaming as raw power clashed with fragile flesh. For a heartbeat, she was certain she would be erased, unmade by the very knowledge she sought. But in that moment of absolute peril, she did not fight it. She let go, allowing the current to carry her, and the terror seamlessly transformed into an unshakable sense of unity. She was no longer Elara standing in a chamber. She was Elara, a living thread in the tapestry of Moria, a vow formed in her heart, not spoken aloud, but etched into her very being. She would not wield this understanding as a tool for command, but as a compass for guidance. The reckless scholar was gone, replaced by a humble guardian. As this decision solidified within her, the deep chambers around her responded. A resonant hum vibrated through the stone, a contented sigh from the mountain. In the distance, the grinding of long-sealed pathways opening echoed like distant thunder. The stale, thin air grew rich and clean, carrying the scent of fresh stone and ozone, as if the very mountain was taking its first deep breath in centuries. The rune's brilliant light dimmed, its energy spent, and the symbol itself faded from the air, searing itself as a permanent, gentle glow into the palm of her hand. Simultaneously, a section of the wall that had been seamless moments before groaned and slid sideways, revealing a smooth, ascending passage. This new tunnel was not dark, but illuminated by the same soft, internal light that now pulsed from her own skin, a guiding path leading not to deeper mysteries, but back toward the world she had left behind, a world she was now irrevocably changed to protect. The ascent felt like a dream. The passages that had been treacherous trials were now calm, welcoming corridors. Where deadly sentinels had stood, small, graceful constructs of polished stone and crystal now bowed their heads as Elara passed, their gemstone eyes glowing with a gentle, respectful light. The mountain itself seemed to exhale around her, the air rich and easy to breathe. When she finally stepped back into the sealed archives, the scene that greeted her was one of stunned silence. The elders who had condemned her stood frozen, their faces a tapestry of shock and dawning reverence. They did not need to ask what she had done. They could feel it in the steady, vibrant hum of the stone beneath their feet, and see it in the soft, constant glow of the unified rune etched into her palm. One elder, a stern dwarf named Borin, who had argued most fiercely for her exile, stepped forward, his voice trembling not with anger, but with a profound ancient fear. "You have unleashed what was sealed for a reason," he whispered, his eyes fixed on her hand. "You risk everything we have built." But as he spoke, a warm breeze, impossible so deep underground, drifted through the chamber, carrying the scent of blooming stone flowers from the gardens below. The very archives around them, once dusty and dim, now seemed to breathe, the carved runes on the walls shimmering with a faint, internal light. The evidence of renewal was undeniable, a quiet rebuttal to his fear. Elara did not proclaim her victory or demand recognition. Instead, she knelt, a gesture of humility she had never offered them before. "I bring no weapon," she said, her voice clear and carrying the new weight of the mountain's memory. "I bring an understanding. This power was never meant to be controlled by one, but shared by all. It is a song, and I have only learned the first note. The offer was not of dominion, but of partnership. The tension in the room broke, not with a shout, but with a collective, weary sigh of relief. Old arguments and divisions, once thought permanent, suddenly felt small and petty against the vast, healing presence now awake within their home. As the clan began to gather in the great hall, its ancient forges already humming with a new, gentle energy, Elara felt a quiet tug, a deep, resonant pull from the chamber far below. The rune on her palm pulsed softly, a reminder that this connection was not a one-time event, but a living bond that would require her return, a periodic journey to the mountain's heart to listen and to learn all over again. The first lesson began not in a dusty hall, but in the humming garden of growth itself. Elara led a small group of young apprentices into the cavern, their wide eyes reflecting the soft, pulsing light of the fungi. She did not start with a lecture. Instead, she knelt by a patch of glow moss and placed her palm flat against the cool, damp earth. "Close your eyes," she instructed, her voice calm. "Listen not with your ears, but with your feet. Feel the rhythm of the roots, the slow, steady pulse of the mountain's vitality." At first, the apprentices fidgeted, their nervousness a palpable energy in the air. One, a bold youth named Kale, reached out too quickly to touch a withered stalk, his touch clumsy with impatience. The delicate fungus recoiled, its light dimming instantly. A wave of panic flashed across his face. "You see," Elara said gently, her hand resting on his shoulder to steady him. "Force is a shout in a library. It disrupts the quiet conversation already happening. Now listen, what does this part of the garden need?" Kale, chastened, closed his eyes again. After a long moment, he whispered, "It feels thirsty. The soil is dry here." Elara nodded, a small smile touching her lips. She handed him a small, carved stone cup. "Then give it a drink, but only a little. Nurture, do not flood." With painstaking care, Kale sprinkled a few drops of water from the sacred river onto the soil. The apprentices watched, holding their collective breath. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint, new glow began to emanate from the earth, a tender green light that slowly spread, healing the withered patch. A collective sigh of relief and wonder went through the group. Their confidence, once so fragile, began to root itself as deeply as the moss they tended. This was the core of Elara's new teaching. She made the decision then to establish a rotation, ensuring every willing dwarf would have a turn tending the deeper chambers. The responsibility for this delicate balance could not rest on one pair of shoulders. It had to be a shared burden and a shared joy, woven into the very fabric of their society. The long-term stakes were nothing less than the survival of their renaissance, ensuring the mountain's awakened magic would not fade into myth once more due to negligence or hoarded knowledge. As the lesson concluded and the garden thrived under their collective care, the youngest apprentice, a girl named Lena, tugged on Elara's sleeve. Her finger pointed to a section of the cavern wall previously bare. "Look," she whispered, "the stone is singing." There, pulsing with the soft, nascent light of a newborn star, was a new, faint rune pattern, its lines delicate and unfamiliar. The mountain was not a static relic. It was a living, evolving entity, and its next lesson was already beginning to write itself upon the walls. The great hall of Moria was transformed into a canvas of living light. Elara stood at its center, the unified rune on her palm, glowing softly as she raised her hand. She did not speak a command, she simply willed a connection, and the air above the gathered clan shimmered. Visions bloomed across the vaulted ceiling, not as silent pictures, but as experiences. They saw the crystal cities of their ancestors not as ruins, but as they were, bustling with life and song. They felt the warmth of forges that could shape living stone, and heard the intricate harmonies of runesmiths working in concert. It was not a history lesson, it was a homecoming for their collective spirit. A wave of awe washed through the crowd, followed by a surge of collective purpose, so powerful, it was almost a physical force. For the first time in generations, every dwarf in the hall, from the eldest elder to the youngest child, shared the same glorious dream. This shared vision ignited a creative firestorm. Inspired by the projected artistry, master architects began sketching designs for new pillars that pulsed with gentle, internal light, while artisans experimented with embedding resonant crystals into their metalwork. The very air hummed with the sound of new rune smithing techniques being born, not from dusty scrolls, but from the living example of their own history. The clan was united in a way that old grievances and tired traditions could not withstand. Yet, in the shadows of this newfound unity, a small, stubborn faction watched with deepening unease. Led by the stern elder Borin, they saw not a renaissance, but a dangerous deviation. They whispered that this new magic was untamed, that opening their hearts to such power would make them vulnerable, that the old, isolated ways were what had kept them safe through centuries of decline. Elara did not silence them. Instead, she sought them out, finding Borin and his followers in a quiet antechamber, their arms crossed in defiance. "The old ways have their wisdom," she began, her voice calm and respectful. "They preserved us when we were weak, but is preservation the same as living?" She gestured back toward the great hall, where the sounds of joyful collaboration echoed. "Look at the new alloy young kale forged today, a metal that sings. It is stronger than any we have, and it was inspired by a vision you also witnessed. Is that not a strength our ancestors would celebrate?" She argued not with the force of her authority, but with the undeniable evidence of renewal around them. She spoke of balance, of honoring the foundation of the past without being imprisoned by its fears. Her logic was sound, but it was her compassion that finally broke through. She acknowledged their fear, she validated their love for the clan, and she reframed their resistance, not as treason, but as a form of protective caution. Slowly, grudgingly, they began to see the renewed pride in their children's eyes and the tangible improvements in their daily lives. One by one, their rigid postures softened. The clan's identity was being reforged in the fires of this collective inspiration, a delicate dance between cherished tradition and daring progress. The stakes could not have been higher, for a culture torn too sharply can lose its soul, just as one that refuses to grow can wither. The celebration that night was unlike any other, filled with new music, played on crystal instruments, and the taste of fungi that glowed with a sweet, ambient light. It was in the midst of this vibrant joy that a breathless young messenger, her clothes dusty from the surface world, pushed her way into the hall. She bore the sigil of a nearby human settlement, and her news sent a ripple of silence through the merry crowd. "Strange tremors have been shaking our fields," she reported, her voice trembling, "and the old stones at the edge of the forest, they have begun to glow with a faint blue light, just like the ones in your legends." The mountain's awakening was not an isolated event. It was sending echoes far beyond its own deep chambers. The human settlement was a fragile patchwork of wood and field under an immense open sky. Elara felt exposed, the sheer scale of the surface world, a stark contrast to the comforting embrace of the mountain. Suspicion was a thick fog in the air. The human elders watched the dwarven delegation with guarded eyes, their hands never far from the tools that could become weapons. Centuries of silence and half-remembered tales of dwarven greed had built a wall between their peoples, and now the very ground was trembling. Elara closed her eyes, letting the rune sight flow through her. To her senses, the land was not solid, but a tapestry of energies. The tremors were not a natural disaster. They were aftershocks, sympathetic vibrations from Moria's own reawakening, pulsing through the deep stone and resonating upward into the human foundations. She knelt, placing her glowing palm flat on the soil. The humans flinched back, muttering about sorcery. "This is not an attack," she explained, her voice calm against their rising fear. "It is a conversation you were not meant to hear. Your village sits on a ley line, a vein of the mountain's energy. Our renewal has made that energy stronger, and your old stonework does not know how to sing along." She proposed a solution, not of force, but of harmony. She showed their masons how to carve simple foundation runes, the most basic symbols of stability, into the cornerstones of their most vulnerable buildings. She did not command the stone, she asked it to listen, to resonate with the new frequencies rather than fight them. A grizzled human blacksmith, his face a roadmap of skepticism, watched her work. He expected grand magic, flashes of lightning. Instead, he saw patience, a quiet dialogue with the earth itself. When she was done, the subtle hum that had been making his teeth ache simply vanished. The ground felt still, solid and safe. That single, shared moment of stability became the first brick in a new bridge of trust. The humans saw that dwarven knowledge was not a weapon to be hoarded, but a tool for mutual survival. Elara's decision to share this rune lore freely was a radical break from ancient tradition, a choice that defined her legacy. She argued that a strong neighbor made for a secure border, that shared prosperity was a better defense than any sealed gate. Slowly, cautiously, trade began to flourish. Dwarven crystals that glowed with steady light were exchanged for hardy surface grains and rare herbs. Human storytellers recorded the new alliance, while dwarven engineers helped design deeper, more stable wells. The stakes had expanded from the fate of a single clan to the stability of the entire region, a fragile seedling of peace that could either grow into a new era or be crushed by the weight of old fears. As Elara's delegation made their way back to the mountain's entrance, she paused, looking back at the lanterns now dotting the human village. She felt a faint, new warmth in her palm. Lifting her hand, she saw it. The Unified Rune, once a static symbol of internal balance, had subtly altered. A fine, new filigree, like the branching pattern of a tree root reaching for the sun, had woven itself into the edges of the design. The mountain's heart was not just beating within its chambers, it was learning to speak to the world above. The Unified Rune in her palm was no longer just a symbol, it was a doorway. When Elara placed her hand against the living stone of Moria's heart chamber, the mountain's thoughts flowed into her mind, not as words, but as pure sensation. She felt the deep, patient contentment of stone that had slept for millennia and was now stretching into wakefulness. She sensed its curiosity about the world above, a world it had only felt as faint vibrations through the earth. This was not a silent, inert mass of rock. Moria was a living entity, and Elara had become its voice. The revelation was overwhelming. Her role was instantly transformed. She was no longer a simple guardian of a powerful artifact, but an interpreter for a consciousness as vast and ancient as the continents themselves. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders, a burden far heavier than any stone. How could she, a single dwarf with her own fears and desires, possibly translate the needs of a mountain without her own will coloring the message? What if she got it wrong? The fear was a constant, cold companion, whispering that a single misinterpretation could lead to catastrophe. To guard against this, she did the one thing her ancestors would have found unthinkable. She shared the power. Elara established a council of rune smiths, the most disciplined and open-minded of her clan. Together, they would learn to listen, to compare the sensations and visions the mountain shared, ensuring that no single perspective could dominate the truth. It was a safeguard, a way to ensure the mountain's ancient voice was heard as a chorus, not a solo. The stakes of their task were no longer just about clan prosperity. The mountain's awakening was sending ripples through the very fabric of the region's magic. The strange glowing stones in the human lands were just the beginning. The flow of underground rivers was shifting, and new, unknown crystals were budding in the deepest caves, their energy affecting the ecosystems that depended on them. Mismanaging this awakening could unravel the delicate balance of an entire world. One evening, during a deep meditation with the council, the mountain's presence swelled in Elara's mind. It did not speak of the present, but pulled her consciousness downward, through layers of stone older than any dwarf. It showed her a vision of a cavern system, so deep and vast, it defied comprehension. A place where the stone itself seemed to breathe with a rhythm that predated life. There, nestled in the absolute dark, something even older than the Unified Rune waited, a secret from the world's first dawn, and it was beginning to stir. The team descended into the abyss, their path illuminated not by desperation, but by the steady glow of rune-etched lanterns. Elara led a hand-picked group of geologists, historians, and runesmiths, each carrying tools calibrated to the mountain's new harmonics. Their ropes were woven with strands of resonant crystal, and their picks hummed with the gentle energy of the foundation rune. This was not a reckless trespass, but a respectful entry into the mountain's oldest memories. The air grew thick with the scent of undisturbed stone and ozone, a perfume of deep time. They moved with a quiet purpose, their footsteps echoing in a silence that felt sacred. What they discovered in the first vast chamber shattered their understanding of history. The walls were not carved with the bold, geometric lines of dwarven artistry, but with flowing, organic spirals and patterns that resembled fossilized sound waves. This was the work of a people who had not carved the stone, but had somehow persuaded it to grow. They found tools of a strange, non-metallic alloy that resonated with a soft, sad music, and fragments of pottery that seemed to capture and hold light itself. This was not a dwarven ruin, It was a pre-Dwarven civilization, a race that had bonded with the mountain long before the first dwarf delved its depths. The implications were staggering, rewriting the very first chapter of their people's story. The environment itself was a challenge. Patches of floor would suddenly lose their solidity, becoming as soft as clay before hardening again. Ghostly, silent images of the long-vanished inhabitants would flicker at the edge of their vision, causing disorientation. One of the geologists, a dwarf named Orin, nearly stepped into a pool of what appeared to be water, but which Elara's rune sight revealed as a pocket of solidified time, ready to trap him in a single, eternal moment. They navigated these anomalies not with force, but with the principles of harmony, using their tuned tools to gently calm the erratic energies. When a corridor began to collapse, they didn't try to shore it up with brute strength. Instead, they sang a stabilizing rhythm in unison, their voices weaving a net of sonic reinforcement that convinced the stone to hold. Elara's leadership was defined by a single, unwavering rule. "We are not looters in a tomb," she told her team, her voice echoing in the immense alien hall. "We are students in a library. Every artifact, every marking, is a sentence in a story we have never heard." She insisted they painstakingly map every chamber and create detailed rubbings of the strange glyphs, prioritizing the preservation of knowledge over the collection of treasure. This ethical stance set a new precedent, transforming the expedition from a grab for power into a quest for understanding. The cultural stakes could not have been higher. If their entire identity was built upon being the first and only children of the mountain, who were they in light of these gentle, ancient predecessors? The discovery threatened to humble their pride, even as it expanded their world. It suggested that their rune craft was not an original invention, but an inheritance, a language they had learned from a teacher who had long since vanished. In the deepest, most silent part of the cavern system, they found it, a seamless door of a pearlescent, unknown material. It was utterly featureless, save for a single, familiar pattern, glowing with a soft, blue light at its center, the same foundational frequency as the original Seven-Layered Rune. The pearlescent door did not swing open, but dissolved, its substance flowing outward like a slow, silent wave and revealing a chamber of impossible geometry. Inside, there were no shelves, no books, no artifacts. Instead, the walls were living, three-dimensional star charts, and the air hummed with the foundational tones of reality itself. This was the Archive of Origins. To read it, Elara did not use the Unified Rune as a key, but as a tuning fork. She pressed her glowing palm against a central node, and the harmony principle resonated through her, a clear note that asked permission rather than demanding entry. The archive answered. Visions flooded their minds, not as dwarven symbols, but as pure concepts of pressure, heat, and vibration. They witnessed the universe speaking its first language, a grammar of physics where light was a verb and gravity was a song. The Seven-Layered Rune, their clan's crowning intellectual achievement, appeared in the flow not as an original masterpiece, but as a brilliant translation, a dwarven dialect of this ancient, cosmic tongue. The revelation was a tremor that shook the clan to its core. For generations, they had believed their rune smithing was a unique gift, a spark of genius that separated them from all other races. Now they learned they were not the authors, but the scholars, inheriting a lexicon older than the mountains themselves. In the great halls above, heated debates erupted. A faction led by Elder Boren argued fiercely that this discovery stripped them of their glory. Our ancestors were not inventors, but merely scribes, he declared, his voice thick with wounded pride. This archive does not elevate us, it makes us secondary. Our entire history is a footnote. The tension threatened to fracture their newfound unity. Elara faced this crisis not with force, but with a radical shift in perspective. She stood before the clan, the faint, new filigree on her palm shimmering. Does a child who learns a language from its parents have less value than the one who invented words? She asked, her voice calm but carrying to every corner of the hall. No, the child grows to write new poetry, to tell new stories in that language. Our ancestors did not steal this knowledge. They listened, they learned, and they built upon it. They gave it a form we could understand and use. That is not a diminishment, it is a legacy. She championed a new era of interdisciplinary study, uniting runesmiths with geologists, historians, and even the newly arrived human linguists. They would study the archive of origins not as a monument to their own inadequacy, but as the ultimate source text, a wellspring of inspiration that could lead to understandings far beyond the 7 layers. The philosophical stakes were immense, challenging the clan to exchange a fragile pride in being first for a more resilient pride in being part of an endless, collaborative story. As the archive's first echoes were carefully integrated into Moria's great library, inscribed on resonant crystal tablets, Elara felt a familiar warmth in her palm. The unified rune pulsed, not with the vigorous beat of the mountain's heart, but with a slower, deeper rhythm, a patient cadence that felt impossibly ancient. It was not reacting to the new knowledge, it was synchronizing with it, as if greeting an old friend it had not seen in millennia. The deeper harmony of the unified rune now pulsed through Elara's council, a collective will focused on a single, monumental task. They gathered in the heart chamber, not as masters, but as musicians preparing their instruments, each rune smith attuning their personal stone focus to the central rhythm Elara provided. Her role was not to command, but to conduct, her glowing palm raised as she listened to the subtle dissonances and resonances within the mountain's vast energy flows. One smith argued for prioritizing structural reinforcement in the oldest halls, while another insisted the growing gardens needed more harmonic sustenance. The debate was tense, a clash of perspectives that threatened to pull the symphony into chaos before it began. Elara did not choose one over the other. Instead, she wove their intentions together, directing a stream of foundational energy to the ancient pillars while simultaneously channeling a softer, growth-oriented frequency to the fungal forests. The effort was immense, a delicate balancing act that demanded absolute trust and mental fortitude from every member of the circle. For a terrifying moment, the energies bucked against their guidance, a wild cord of power threatening to shatter their control. But they held their collective will a single, unbreakable net. Then the mountain answered. A deep, resonant chord hummed up from the stone, a fundamental note that shook the very air. In response, every rune-etched wall in Moria began to glow in sequence, a wave of soft light sweeping through the corridors. The crystals in the great hall brightened, their light becoming a steady, warm illumination that banished all shadows. The subterranean rivers, once sluggish, ran with a new, vibrant clarity, their waters chiming musically against the stone. The very air grew fresher, carrying the clean scent of ozone and blooming stone flowers, a tangible improvement that every dwarf, from the youngest to the oldest, could feel in their lungs and see in the renewed vibrance of their home. This was not a display of raw power, but a proof of profound responsibility. They had not taken from the mountain, they had collaborated with it, and the result was a thriving, singing city. In the profound silence that followed the symphony's final note, a new sound emerged from a previously blank section of the heart chamber wall, the gentle, persistent trickle of water. The stone parted like a curtain, revealing a small, hidden spring, its waters shimmering with a soft, opalescent light. The first dwarf to drink from it, an elder plagued by an old joint injury, felt a warmth spread through the limb, the chronic stiffness easing for the first time in decades. It was a minor miracle, a gift of gratitude from a mountain now fully in concert with its children. The healing spring's waters demanded a new kind of architecture. Elara and her most dedicated apprentices did not build pipes, but grew them, coaxing the mountain's own crystal veins into forming delicate, rune-inscribed conduits that snaked through the deepest halls. These channels were not merely functional, they were educational, each inscribed rune pulsing with the soft light of the harmony principle. To drink from a public fountain was to feel a gentle lesson in balance flow through you, a reminder that the water was a gift, not a resource to be consumed without thought. The effects were immediate and profound. The chronic cough that had plagued the oldest miners for decades simply vanished. Lingering aches from old injuries faded away, replaced by a newfound ease of movement. The general vitality of the entire clan seemed to lift, their eyes brighter, their steps more sure, a visible testament to their deepening bond with the awakened mountain. Yet this very blessing created its first real test of their new society. A quiet tension emerged over distribution. Dwarves from the upper halls, accustomed to scarcity, began lining up with oversized flagons, fearing the spring might run dry. Those who lived nearer the source felt a proprietary right to its bounty. The conflict was not one of malice, but of old habits, the deep-seated fear of lack clashing with the reality of abundance. Elara faced a critical decision, one that would define the nature of their renewal. She could have placed guards at the fountains, or rationed the water by decree, turning the gift into a controlled commodity. Instead, she gathered the clan and presented a simple guideline, a covenant of shared responsibility. The spring is for all, she declared, but its flow is finite. Take only what you need for today, and trust that it will be here for you tomorrow. This act of trust transformed the springs from a mere utility into a sacred symbol. The daily act of collecting water became a quiet, communal ritual. Dwarves would pause at the fountains, reading the runes, feeling the harmony of the flow, and remembering their personal role in preserving it. They began to police themselves, gently reminding a neighbor who filled too large a container, not with accusation, but with a shared understanding. This careful stewardship was the ultimate proof of their cultural shift, demonstrating that the principles of balance were taking root not just in their runes, but in their hearts. The news of Moria's healing waters, carried by traders and traveling miners, could not be contained. Dwarven emissaries from distant, skeptical holds began to arrive, their stern faces etched with curiosity and a deep, yearning hope. They came to study the springs, to witness the impossible renewal with their own eyes. Watching them drink from the rune-inscribed fountains, their expressions shifting from doubt to wonder, Elara felt the weight and the promise of the next step. She looked at her council and spoke the idea taking shape in her mind. "It is time," she said, "to invite them all." The great hall of Moria now held the collective breath of a dozen dwarf lords, their faces a landscape of skepticism and guarded hope under the soft, steady light of the glowing pillars. Elara stood before them, not on a raised dais, but on the same level stone floor. She raised her palm, and the unified rune shone, not to command their gaze, but to invite their understanding. She did not lecture. Instead, she willed the air to shimmer, and the story of the 7 layers unfolded around them all. They felt the Sentinel's patient strength, the psychic weight of the gate, the delicate music of the Crystal Labyrinth. It was not a display of power, but a sharing of profound vulnerability, the story of every failure and every hard-won insight laid bare. She offered the principles freely, the keys to harmony, the understanding of the heart rune, not as secrets to be hoarded, but as tools for the survival of all their people. A deep silence followed, thick with the weight of centuries of isolation and rivalry. Then, the Lord of the Iron Peak Hold, a dwarf known for his unwavering pragmatism, stepped forward. His voice, usually a boom of authority, was quiet. "You would give us this. You would not demand tribute or fealty." Elara met his gaze, her own resolve clear. "I demand only that we stop repeating the same old stories of decline. Our strength was never in our isolated forges, but in the shared song of the mountain." One by one, the other leaders added their voices, not in submission, but in agreement, weaving a new pact of collaborative research and mutual aid, a Dwarven Concord inspired by Moria's renewal. Yet a few holds remained aloof, their arms crossed. The Emberdeep envoy voiced their fear. "This collaboration sounds like a pretty word for assimilation. We will lose our ways, our identity, swallowed by Moria's shadow." The tension was a cold draft in the warm hall. Elara's answer was not an argument, but an offer. "Moria will not be a capital, but a crossroads. Let this hall be a neutral ground for dialogue, and our archives a library for all. I am not a queen to be obeyed, but a facilitator who has learned to listen." To prove her point, she directed the Concord's first joint project, using their combined rune lore to stabilize a failing geothermal vent in the Emberdeep territory itself. When the project succeeded, bringing warmth and power back to their cold halls, their resistance melted not out of defeat, but out of a newfound, shared conviction. The future of their entire civilization now balanced on this fragile alliance, a choice between a golden age of unified innovation or a slow retreat into the old, suspicious silos that had nearly doomed them all. As the convocation drew to a close, a soft gasp rippled through the crowd. The unified rune on Elara's palm began to pulse with a gentle, rhythmic light. And as it glowed, similar, fainter symbols, echoes of the harmony principle, flickered into existence on the hands of every dwarf lord in the chamber, a silent, luminous web of connection binding them together. The Rune Singer program began not in a forge, but with a simple song. Elara gathered her first class in the Garden of Growth, choosing weavers, masons, and musicians alongside the traditional smiths. She taught them that a rune was not just a shape to be carved, but a living idea that could be expressed through any medium that respected its core principle. A weaver could thread the foundation rune into a tapestry, making the cloth itself feel reassuringly solid and durable. A musician could compose a melody based on the harmony rune, its notes bringing a sense of calm focus to any who heard it. This was not a dilution of their ancient craft, but a diversification, a way to weave runic understanding into the very fabric of daily life. The results were astonishing. Locks were forged that opened not to a key, but to a specific sequence of chimes. Sculptures were carved from resonant stone that would hum with a soft, comforting warmth when someone felt sorrow nearby. Dwarven culture began to bloom with these new, emotive technologies, making the mountain's magic feel less like a secret language for elites and more like a shared heritage for everyone. Of course, this radical shift drew sharp criticism. The traditionalists, led by a stubborn master smith named Grimvar, stood at the edges of these new workshops, their arms crossed. "This is frivolity," he would grumble loudly. "You turn sacred symbols into parlor tricks. A rune's power is in its precise geometry and the smith's unwavering will, not in a pretty song." The tension was a low, constant heat in the forges. Yet, for every elder who scoffed, a dozen young dwarves were captivated. The Rune Singer program offered a path to connection that did not require a lifetime of grueling metalwork, attracting artists and thinkers who would have never approached a smithy. The traditions were not being abandoned, they were being invigorated by a new generation. Elara's most controversial decision was to personally mentor Kale, the half-human youth who had shown such clumsy impatience in the garden years before. His mixed heritage made him an outsider in both worlds, but it had gifted him with a unique, intuitive empathy. He could not always articulate the geometric rules of a rune, but he could feel its emotional resonance, understanding the sorrow in a memory rune or the joy in a creation symbol as if they were his own feelings. Grimvar and his followers saw this as the final insult, a breaking of the oldest bloodline traditions. How can one who is not fully of the mountain hope to understand its deepest heart? He challenged her publicly. Elara's response was quiet but firm. The mountain's heart speaks a language older than dwarves or humans. It speaks in vibration and intent. Kale listens in that language. He is not less of a student for it. He is a different kind of scholar. By embracing him, she ensured the legacy would not be a closed loop, but a branching tree, its roots strong enough to support many different kinds of growth. The ultimate success of the program was revealed during its first public recital. A young mason was demonstrating a new melodic lock, her hammer tapping a gentle, rhythmic pattern against a stone door. As the final note rang out and the lock clicked open, a deep, resonant hum answered from the walls themselves. The entire chamber seemed to vibrate in approval, a subtle but undeniable chorus from the mountain. In that moment, surrounded by the diverse faces of her students and feeling the stone's contentment, Elara felt a profound and quiet peace. Her work was no longer just about preserving a power from the past, but about planting a living seed that would continue to grow, adapt, and flourish long after her own name was forgotten. This enduring legacy, however, would soon face its greatest challenge not from within, but from the deep and forgotten dark. The light of the star-dusted cavern pulsed in time with Elara's breathing, a gentle rhythm of peace. Then the stars above her stilled. The mountain's consciousness, usually a deep and wordless hum, coalesced into a single crystalline thought that settled in her mind not as a sound, but as a perfect, unshakable knowing. The ones who laid the foundation will come back. They will look upon what their children have built. The message held no threat, only a patient, immeasurable expectation, a final examination date set for an age she would never see. The profound certainty of it washed through her, leaving a strange and quiet humility in its wake. All their renewal, their proud forges and singing crystals, were not an end, but a single, hopeful chapter in a story that would be judged by its original authors. This was not a call to arms, but a call to generations. How do you build a society not for a decade, but for a millennium? The knowledge settled not as a burden, but as a gentle, persistent tension, a north star for their collective ambition that would forever guide them away from complacency. There would be no invasion to fight, no immediate crisis to solve, only the slow, beautiful work of becoming worthy. Elara went directly to the Great Archive, but she did not inscribe the message as a dire prophecy. Instead, she recorded it as the first entry in a new chronicle, titled The Book of the Return. She framed it not as a test to be feared, but as a future celebration to be prepared for, a great festival for which every generation must help weave the banners and polish the halls. She established a tradition where each new leader would add their own entry, a record of progress and principles, a letter to the future and to the past. The ultimate stakes were now clear. The responsibility passed like a sacred torch through time. Would their descendants be proud of what they had built? Would the ancient ones look upon their works and see not clumsy imitation, but wise and beautiful innovation? Elara left the Starfall Cavern with a light heart, her steps firm on the stone. The work ahead was no longer just about preserving what was, but about nurturing what could be, a legacy that would span ages and greet the returning dawn with a song of welcome. The rhythmic clang of hammers in the heart of the forge now beat with a new, collaborative energy. Elara stood not at a solitary anvil, but before a large, crystalline slate, where a complex rune was taking shape under the guidance of several young apprentices. This was the communal rune, a project designed to allow multiple minds to safely channel minor runic energies together. The air crackled not with the heat of molten metal, but with the focused will of the team, each apprentice responsible for a different segment of the emerging symbol. The challenge was immense, a delicate dance of harmonizing individual intent. If one dwarf focused too hard on strength, while another channeled flexibility, their conflicting wills would create dissonance, causing the rune to flicker and sputter like a dying flame. It required a profound level of trust, each participant having to soften their personal control to make space for the others, learning to listen with their minds as much as with their ears. Elara moved among them, her voice a calm guide. Do not push your energy into the rune, she instructed. Let it flow through you and match the rhythm of the person next to you. It is a conversation, not a command. When a young weaver named Lena hesitated, her section wavering, Elara did not take over. Instead, she placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Your understanding of woven patterns is perfect for this. Think of it as threading your will into a shared tapestry." Lena took a steadying breath, adjusted her focus, and her segment of the rune glowed with a strong, steady light. As the final line was etched into the crystal, a warm, golden radiance blossomed from the slate, holding firm and unified. The project was a success. Elara then took a deliberate step back, gesturing for the apprentices to perform the final integration themselves. With careful hands, they embedded the activated rune into the foundation of a new public plaza. The effect was immediate and beautiful. The stone paving stones seemed to knit themselves together with impossible speed, their seams glowing softly before fading to a gentle, permanent warmth. Fountains carved by the masons now flowed with water that chimed musically, and crystalline street lamps bloomed to life, their light pulsing in a gentle, calming rhythm. All across Moria, similar communal runes began to appear, enabling teams to construct breathtaking arches that strengthened under pressure and gardens where the flora thrived with shared vitality. This was the full democratization of rune tech, a power once guarded by a select few, now thriving in the hands of the entire community, ensuring the mountain's magic served everyone. As the communal rune cast its enduring, warm glow over the forge, Elara smiled, knowing that the layers of rune tech were now in the best possible hands. The great hall fell into a breathless hush as Elara raised her glowing palm. The unified rune blazed, a miniature star contained within her hand, its light reflecting in the wide eyes of every dwarf gathered. They expected her to speak a proclamation, to claim her place as the rune's master and their undisputed leader, but she did not. Instead, she knelt, pressing her hand flat against the cool, dark stone of the floor. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as she did not draw the power upward into herself, but pushed it downward, pouring every ounce of its vast energy back into the mountain's core. It was an act of supreme selflessness, a relinquishment of ultimate personal power for the sake of a shared future. The light did not vanish from her palm, but it changed, softening from a blazing command to a gentle, steady pulse that beat in perfect time with the deep, resonant thrum now rising through the stone beneath their feet. She was not its owner, but its first and most devoted guardian. In that moment, she transformed from a bearer of power into a living symbol of unity, her own destiny woven irrevocably into the fate of her people and the mountain they called home. The mountain's response was immediate and beautiful. A wave of soft, warm light bloomed from the heart chamber far below, a silent, gentle tide that flowed outward through every corridor and hall. It illuminated the ancient forges, the crystal gardens, the deep archives, and the smallest sleeping quarters, bathing all of Moria in a serene, eternal radiance. This was not the harsh glare of conquest, but the soft glow of essence, a light that felt like coming home. The rune tech was no longer a secret to be guarded or a tool to be wielded. It had become as fundamental to Moria as the air they breathed or the stone they carved, an inseparable part of its living spirit. It was now protected by all and owned by none, a sacred trust passed to the entire clan. The light settled, and in the new, peaceful silence, Elara finally stood. She looked out at her people, her face illuminated not by the rune's power, but by their shared achievement. The long, lonely quest was over, and the true work of building their future together had just begun. The rune on Elara's palm was now a faint, silvery scar, a quiet map of a journey that had reshaped a world. She stood on a high balcony, her hands resting on cool, living stone, and watched the new generation at work below. They were not just smiths, but rune weavers and crystal singers, their tools as likely to be a loom or a flute as a hammer. A young dwarf, her hands tracing patterns in the air, coaxed a new, gentle light from the veins of crystal in the ceiling, while another hummed a complex melody that persuaded a stream of water to dance and chime in a newly carved fountain. They expanded upon the 7 layers, not with rigid dogma, but with a creative respect that brought a soft smile to her aged face. This was the potential she had unlocked. The deepest chambers, once sealed tombs of fear, were now bustling halls of learning, where the echoes of ancient guardians were met with thoughtful questions, not panicked flight. The air itself tasted of ozone and blooming stone flowers, a testament to a vitality the mountain had not known for millennia. Her own story, once so urgent and solitary, felt now like a single, foundational verse in an epic that would be sung for ages to come. A deep and quiet contentment settled in her bones, as steady and enduring as the mountain's own heartbeat. The true power was never in the rune itself, but in the wisdom to build a legacy that could flourish long after the symbol had faded from her skin.